And the subject matter of this video is sadly another vehicle that never came into fruition, which is a real pity because, what could have been? Oh well, you are too lovely for this lame earth. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for my 1/35th scale US T110e5 Heavy Tank. The model here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and/or purchase. However, as I often mention in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. This was most certainly a really unique build, and in order to build the model up to the way we see it here, I did have to deviate from the out-of-the-box kit components. In this video, we're going to be giving the model a thorough in-box review, as well as I'm going to be going over the various custom and aftermarket add-ons that were made to the model, bringing it up to the condition that we see it here. With all that in mind, there's going to be a lot of really cool info coming right at you, so just sit back and enjoy the show. To kick this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle here is the US T110e5 Heavy Tank prototype. The T110 program was started by the US military in the post-war years in the nifty 50s. The idea was that they needed a heavy tank to best deal with the Soviet heavy tanks that were either being fielded at the time or that were on the drawing board and in development. During the World War II timeframe, the US military always had a problem with developing a heavy tank. They had lots of attempts at it, and most of them met with some severely mixed results. By the end of World War II, the T-29 series was basically what was going to be fielded. However, the war ended and the program just went into nothing. It was then where this program here began to take off. Just like where the T-29 series was using several off-the-shelf parts from the M26 and M46 patent, the T-110 series were going to be utilizing off-the-shelf parts from the now newly produced and released and adopted M48 tank series. During the developmental period, the designers really were thinking outside the box and had some very creative and innovative designs that were being proposed, specifically by Chrysler Corporation. Some of the designs featured a alt casemate type layout, while others featured a more traditional type setup, and that's really what the E5 variant that we have here is mimicking. The reason why I say mimicking, because the waters actually get kind of murky at this point onward, because the vehicle sadly didn't really develop into anything off the drawing board and some wooden mock-ups and models that were made, so we don't really have that much information. And also, to make the water that much more murkier, a lot of the information is being kind of confused with video game type lore because of the popularity of these vehicles in the online MMO tank games. For instance, this vehicle has a designation as the E5, and that, as far as I'm able to tell, is just complete fiction, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. Either way, this vehicle had a traditional type layout where you had a standard hull with a fully revolving turret. The turret itself would have been armed with the 100mm anti-tank armament. As I mentioned before, this vehicle was going to incorporate many of the off-the-shelf design features and parts from the M48 series. This would be the design of the all-elliptical cast bat-top hull, an all-cast turret, or at least on this variant, and the running gear was all going to be, again, just borrowed and lifted from the M48 series. For engines, there were lots of different options that were being developed at this time, all of them from the company Continental, and these tend to have been all gasoline powered. However, all of this was really for naught, because during the developmental period, this one over here, there was a other competitive vehicle that was being developed at the same time. That vehicle was showing a lot of promise and looked to be a viable option, which became fielded as the M103. The M103 went on to see service, while the T110 series was basically just halted and left into the waste bin of armor development history. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/35th scale resin 3D printed US T110e5 Heavy Tank prototype kit from the company SS Model. Whew, that was a mouthful. If anyone's a fan of the channel, of course, thank you. I can never say that enough. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you aren't. But back to what I was alluding to before. If you are a fan of the channel, you'll know that this is not the first time, nor is it the second or third, or I believe this is probably the sixth time at this point, I'm losing track, on a model kit from the company SS Model, and there's a good reason for that. SS Model is a relatively new addition to the modeling hobby, and they have been producing a range of vehicle kits in wacky subject matters that were just ignored by the other mainline plastic modeling manufacturers. This kit here, of course, is definitely one of them. What's unique about their kits is that for the medium, they are produced in a resin, but the resin is a 3D print material, as opposed to the older kits from back in the day, which were similar in subject matter to these guys over here, but those were done in old school cast resin. If anyone grew up in the 90s and you knew about Accurate Armor or companies like that, that's basically the type of genre that this kit would have been produced in. So it's almost like the spiritual successor to those kits. SS Model has a wide range of very interesting and bizarre vehicles, which definitely caught my attention, which is why I've been snagging them up in the last year or so, and it's definitely something I don't see an end to in sight. The company is located out in China, and when you purchase from them, you have to purchase from them via their eBay store. They may sell stuff on other e-tailers like Amazon or possibly AliExpress. However, from my experience with them, I deal with them solely through eBay, and so far their products and their customer service have been top-notch. Haven't really had any problems. This is the type of kit here, or I should say these series of kits here are the type of thing where if you're up with the old boomer of I buy things in stores because that's how it's done, well, you're going to have to step outside your comfort zone, because stores are not going to stock these kits, and if they do, they're just going on the eBay store and buying them and charging you a markup, or they just have some distribution with them because it's a god-tier hobby shop. But from my experience, this is something you're going to be dealing with via the online store. This particular model here is a very recent addition to the stash. I think I picked it up about 2 or 3 months ago, so obviously it's not going to have any, looks like it has a little bit of dust on the surface, but it's nothing nearly as egregious as some of the other builds that I've done. And also I'm looking across the room right now and I see one that has a literal layer of silt on the surface. Stay tuned for that. But this one over here, again, it's a very new addition to the stash. Of all of the really cool and interesting kits that they produce, one of them is a series of kits, being the US proposed T110 Heavy Tank series. On this channel, I already built one of the other examples that they produce, which is the casemate version, which is a really awesome kit. I love that one. And so I wanted to go ahead and flesh out the collection with the other 2 examples that are also produced by them. This one here is the turreted version, and another variant that they produce looks similar to the casemate, but it's an actual turret, which is very strange, interesting, bizarre, and it's one I definitely want to get. But that's a topic for another video. These kits here are fairly affordable. They retail anywhere between about 40 to about $100 US, depending on the vehicle in question. And also shipping is very reasonable as well, and many times it's free if there's a sale going on. And also when there is a sale going on, the prices are slashed to really enticing levels. Or normally the shipping rates are, again, fairly commonplace for what you'll see for typical kits of this size being shipped from overseas. The models are, again, all printed in a 3D resin material, and they're offered in a multitude of different scales, from smaller scale from 172 up to the larger scales, being even in the 116 and larger range. Really, really cool. I definitely am going to be snatching a couple of those as time goes on, but again, that's a topic for another day. Back to the subject matter that we have here. This is something that I saw, I'm like, yeah, after my experience with the other one, I'm definitely interested in snatching the other 2. So I'm going to start with this one over here and then work my way up. As for their kits, they do periodically upgrade their CAD files, and I've seen this on a few other models that they've released in the past, where the earlier versions were not as advanced as the newer counterparts, and I have mentioned this in a few of the other videos where I assembled and built one of their other kits. So depending when you buy the model, you're going to be getting the most up-to-date version when you buy, of course, from them directly, which needless to say is the best way to do it. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start with the box art and the graphic design. So this one here is, again, fresh from the printer, both figuratively and literally. And the box is very different and more evolved compared to some of the earlier examples that I've brought on this channel in the past. The old ones came in this like white shoebox type format, which just screamed old school 90s garage kit, which I personally liked. But the newer ones seem to be coming in a box that has some better presentation. As you can see, it's this black box over here. It actually slides open as opposed to the shoebox type format. We have here the SS model logo right there in gold emblazed on the side. This one doesn't have a security sticker. The other kit that I purchased at the same time did. If anyone wants to know what that is, I'm pretty sure that video is going to drop before this one does, so stay tuned for that. But that's all there is to mention about the box. On the box art, we just have here a sticker of the vehicle in question, and they basically just jacked the background from some sort of marketing from World of Tanks. If I was to take a guess, it looks like the World of Tanks type format, and they just threw in the CAD rendering of the tank in question. The other graphic design includes, what the vehicle is right there. It's 1/35 scale, T110e5. It's 3D printed right there in the corner. It's telling you that this is not a toy. Do not eat it. It's definitely not something for children to build at all. And then here we have the other information right there written in Mandarin, and the kit number is 35530 for anyone who, of course, is interested. Cracking open the box will reveal the kit contents, and spoiler alert, there's going to be... things are not as what they seem, in a good way. So let me go ahead and crack it open. Alright, so first and foremost, the kits are produced in this beige skin color type resin material, and the same material I've seen on several other 3D prints that come from overseas, be it from T-Rex and even Dragon looks like they're getting in on it. So this material, as well as the printers that are used, they seem to be very common and almost our industry standard at this point. That's the good news. The other good news is that literally everything on these kits here are 3D printed. There's no turned aluminum, there's no photo etch, nothing like that. It's just all 3D prints. Occasionally, depending on the kit, you may get something extra. One of my kits, they gave me a little section of metal cable. I've seen some other kits come with a section of photo etch grill. However, by and large, the kits are purely just 3D printed resin. And that's the good bit. The one bit that isn't that great is that the kit obviously, well, came in busted. And this is something that I have seen more often than not with these SS model kits. Now, I've built a number of them at this point, about under 10. So I'm starting to see a pattern here. And even though the parts are well packed, it's not uncommon for the parts to come in busted. That's the bad news. But don't run away just yet. Don't start, going nuts into the comment section proclaiming that the company sucks. Pump your brakes, because there is a good news and a good happy ending with that, and that is that their customer service is the bomb. Their customer service is awesome. It is second to none, and honestly, I haven't seen customer service this good from many other companies. I've dealt with many of the major ones, and they have been great. They helped me out, but not to the level as these guys. So if their models come in broken, they do stand behind their product. Basically, all you got to do is send pictures and tell them with an email, or in this case, or my case, I should say, a eBay message saying that, yo, the parts came in broken, here goes the photos, and they will replace them free of charge. I even had an instance on one of my kits where some of the parts were broken. I had them replace it, only for a week later to see some other parts were broken, and I notified them, and they sent them also again. So I have nothing but high regard for this company, and they do stand behind their products very well. So let's just, this bag of loveliness right there, I'll set that aside. Let's start with the big one. So here's the upper hull. The hull, as you can see, is a single printing. That includes the upper hull, the lower hull, the engine deck, even the tin work. And the suspension too is integrally printed on. Looks nice. Well, not this one. This one's a bit smashed. But again, I contacted and reached out to the company, and they went ahead and replaced the upper free of charge. It's in this box over here. It was actually shipped with some other replacement parts I need for another SS model kit that I built. That the parts came in busted, and again, they promptly obliged. By the way, I didn't pay a single red cent to get these parts replaced, and the shipping was also free. So again, I have very good words to say about this manufacturer and their business. Let me set the box aside so we could do the review. Here goes the upper hull right here. It's still mint in the box, so or in the bubble wrap, I should say. Hopefully it is intact. Otherwise, they're getting another email. Let's see. Okay. There we go. And by the way, this is all live. I have yet to actually thoroughly open this package up. I just briefly saw from the bubble wrap that it looked okay. And that's what the hull is supposed to look like. So let me go ahead and open this guy up. Get rid of this rusty tetanus little thing. Alright. Okay, the little support structure trestle thing busted off. That's okay. You have to cut these off anyway. It's a non-issue. So let me go ahead and peel out the components, or I should say the upper hull. And there we have it. Now that is more appropriate. So as I mentioned before, everything is a single printing, which cuts down on the part count immensely. And that's one of the hallmarks found on the SS kits, is that basically there's minimum amount of assembly that needs to be done by the builder, which is good and arguably a weak point at the same time. Depends on your philosophy and what you're looking for, but I find that to be a plus. It's actually how I like to design my 3D printed stuff. Look at my T50 turret from the V100, but that's neither here nor there. As you can see, everything is integrally printed on, and the prints are very high quality. The surface does not have any of those scan or print lines that are typically found on more homebrew or lower end type prints. So whatever machine they're using is definitely a high quality one. With the camera brought in, you get to see the periscope detailing in better light. You get to see the driver's periscope over there, although there's no driver's hatch, interestingly enough. Maybe I'll change that. I don't know. We'll see how that works. On the inside, it is nice and hollow, as you can see. So the weight, it's got a little bit of heft to it, but it's not nearly as heavy if the thing was solid resin cast. And again, it just has the feel of the old school resin kits from the 90s, like I stated before. Only they were actually thicker and sometimes solid. But back to this one here, you can see the detailing found on the side toolboxes. You can also see the rigidity strips found here on the tin work. Very nicely detailed with the camera brought in. There's the exhaust manifold right there. Hollow printing. We have here the engine grills. They look pretty good for what they are. We have even the tow cable eyelets integrally printed on, and they are printed hollow, so they're ready for the wire from the get-go. All you gotta do is carefully paint around them, and you should be good to go. On the rear portion over here, I'm kind of glad that not pouring base, that's for cast resin, the structure busted off, so you get to see what the rear hull detailing looks like. We have the access hatches over there, which I believe are for the brakes, if I'm not mistaken. If any packing guy out there knows, hit me up. We have here the telephone box. That is a separate printed part that needs to be glued on. We have here the provisions for the lift or the tow points, as well as the tow hitch, which would go right there in the center. If anyone has seen the other T110 video, it's very similar, if not identical, to that one. Here you get to see the suspension. Note all the swing arms are there, integrally printed on, as well as the bump stops and the shock absorbers right there. So again, no assembly needs to be done by the builder on this one. It's ready to go from the get-go. Hey, that rhymes. The final drive, pretty plain. It's not as ornate as some of the 1/35 scale ones from the other companies, but again, more than suffice for the job at hand. The biggest weakness I found on the T110 series is the shock absorbers. They just have like this like conical shaped object over there. It resembles more of a rubber bump stop as opposed to a spring. This being quote unquote a paper panzer, you could probably just paint it to resemble rubber and it'll probably be all right. On my last build, I went ahead and replaced these with cast resin copies of springs from another patent kit, and I'll probably be doing the same thing for here. Also, what's missing are the torsion bar end sections found on the swing arms. This I actually have a set for that's HD 3D printed that will just drop onto these ones over here. Again, you'll see what that looks like as the video goes on. And that's it for the hull. The hull looks great. You know, it's nice to have one intact, which, by the way, now I have a busted hull over here for me to do whatever I wish. And I do have spare 10 work floating around my spare bin from a Dragon patent. And, you know, maybe I just need some kind of a wacky turret for it. If someone could find me the T54E1 turret, point me in that direction, because that would be a kind of cool project. But that's wishful thinking for now. I'll be back. Back into the box takes us to the next component, which is the turret. This is the E5 version. It would have, or I guess it was supposed to have, the rotating turret like this one here. And the turret, to me, looks very similar to just an M41 Walker Bulldog turret, but obviously on steroids. What's interesting to point out is that the little turret commander's cupola thing is on the opposite side. Generally on American tanks, this would be inverted. Maybe that's just how this vehicle was or it was proposed. But it's just interesting to point out. Regardless, you can see the quality of the print. Looks like this one did have a shift in the print right over here. I ran into that on the T6 medium tank, and this is something that I did address. I took care of it. Wasn't hard to do, and I'll do the same thing with this one here. I like the giant lift rings right there. That's kind of cool. We also have the mantlet. The mantlet is very similar to the M103. And that is definitely not by accident. On the turret, we have here a loader's hatch. It's got the little counterweights or the counterbalance springs integrally printed on. It's got the hinge system, and it has the handle integrally printed on as well. More than likely, I'm going to amputate that and replace it with a real metal one, as I generally do on these builds, but regardless, it's there. The turret is also a hollow printing, as you can see. Also, the turret does not have any sort of locking system like you see on other kits, like plastic model kits, for instance, where they have that twist feature. This guy doesn't have that, which again is quite typically seen on Resin models. The mantlet is also, since it's integrally printed on, it is solid. It cannot elevate or depress, so what you have is what you'll get. This may be something that might turn off some people out there, but generally it's fine for 99.9% of the individuals who are building this vehicle, myself included. We have some periscope details around the turret here. They look pretty good. I like the way they rendered out the prisms. And this brings us to the mini cupola turret. Very different design compared to the ones found on the M48 as well as also on the M60. Kind of has this hemispherical type shape. Pretty interesting, pretty cool. The hatch is integrally built in with the hinges right over there. Not really sure how well this would elevate with the hatches dangling over there like that. Kind of looks like it defeats the point, but thing was never built to begin with, so we'll never know for certain. Kind of cool though. It does have several suggestion points for several other details that need to be glued to the sides. And that's all there is to mention about the turret. Go ahead and set this aside. Using the busted hull over here, I'll just temporarily place it on, and hey, it's kind of taking shape. It kind of looks like it was knocked out, which, not something I'm into, but it kind of looks cool regardless. Okay, so this leads us to the next part in the bag, which is the main ordnance. It looks like the same exact armament found on the M103 Heavy Tank, which is a really good can opener. So the piece is solid printing through and through. It originally came in a cage, but the cage did not survive shipping. But hey, it did its job because the barrel is in completely intact shape. Unlike some of the Resin kits, there's no metal rod molded on the inside. And it's just basically printed through and through. It has the bore evacuator right over here on the front. It also has the cylindrical type flash suppressor, which is an iconic bit of detailing for this set. And we also have no muzzle section over here. It's just flat. This is something that I also saw on the other T110 and was something that I did address, and rest assured I'm going to do the same thing to this one here, probably with the exact same method because it worked so well the first time. If you are working on this kit and you are not happy with this, rest assured you can actually replace the entire barrel here with a aftermarket one for the Dragon M103. Those ones were made out of turned aluminum and brass and might be a noteworthy addition to add to your model in case you deem that this one here, it's not to your liking. But for my application though, unless something catastrophic happens, knock on wood it doesn't, it should be just fine. Oh, and just really quick, there's like my knocked out one. Yeah, it's taking shape. It looks pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie. I'm really excited about starting this project. Okay, next runner is in this cage setup here. Many of the 3D printed parts are in a cage, which is different from what we'd expect on plastic model kits where they come on runners. With the way things are manufactured with print, they have a cage set up here which prevents them from getting broken, which is something that I've even done on my own prints that I produce for ECA. Here we have a little bag that's definitely not going to get used, but what else is in here? We have a travel lock. Hopefully that comes out. It kind of reminds me of the one found on the T-30 series of American heavy tanks from World War II. Probably not accidental. We have here some Pioneer tools. I see an axe over there. A crowbar, which appears to be slightly warped. You can just hit that with a heat gun, it'll straighten out pretty quickly. We have here some other tools. I see a sledgehammer in between the bars there, an axe handle, a few other odds and ends. We'll see what that looks like in better light once the thing is freed from the cage. Oh, there's the cage for the barrel right there. Did its job, prevented from getting busted. And the next runner is this box that we have here, which contains more turret detail parts, as well as some other hull parts. So here we have the telephone box. It looks fantastic. It definitely looks the part very well. In addition to the telephone box, we have the first aid kit right there next to it. We have here the taillights. Taillights are really nicely rendered out. They're the same cat file, looks like, from the other T110. Just like that one, for some reason the cat's eye lenses are not present. Perhaps this is just a carryover from this kit being offered in 1/72 or 1/48 scale. And when they blew it up to 135, they just didn't add the detailing, because in the smaller scale, something like that is very hard to print. But in 135, obviously, it can be done. On my other one, I actually addressed this and I took care of that, and chances are really good I'm going to do the same thing here. Spoiler alert, many of the modifications I made to the other one, I'm going to be making to this one, which I'll get to. Next thing we have here is the tow hitch on the tow hitch bracket. It is a integral printed part, single printing, very easy to install, as well as the lift rings for the front and the rear. The rear ones do have the cotter pin detailing integrally printed on. Very nice bit of detailing, which is funny, they were able to do that, but they couldn't do the cat's eye. A little strange. We also have a lift ring over there for the hull. I only see one. I'm pretty sure there might be another one. Yep, it's right over there. We have the headlight cluster with the brush guard integrally printed on. The headlight brush guards seem to be slightly deformed. This is something I may fix with just a little shot from the heat gun, but in actuality, in practice, these things get dinged up pretty easily and often, so it's something that you could just leave it and it'll be perfectly fine. We have here what appears to be an air blower of some sort. No, I think it's a searchlight. Yep, it's a searchlight. Pretty cool. It's got the freaking wire integrally printed on. I mean, come on. That's awesome. That's going to be a pain in the ass trying to take the sprue off of that, but hey, it's still cool nonetheless. Fortunately, if that breaks, it's easy to fix or replace. And we have the turret grab handles right there on either side, much along the lines as you see on an M48 or an M60. That's all there is to that. And this leads us to the next bundle of joy, which is all of this. So one thing that's noteworthy about the SS model kits is that the suspension on them tend to be integrally printed on, where we have the roll wheels, the sprocket, the rollers, and the track as a single printing. I've seen that on many World War II vehicles. But for their T110 series, they did it in a slightly different way, and I personally like that. First, the track on these vehicles it is actually one of the more difficult aspects of the build because of paintwork. Assembly, actually, it streamlines things quite a bit. In fact, like I said before in other videos, this is what Lincoln Lang tracks pretend to be. Like, when a Lincoln Lang track looks in the mirror, this is what it sees. In actuality, we just see the thing all janked and looks awful. It's still better than individual Lincoln. Like almost anything is better than that crap. But for this one over here, for the SS model kits, what makes them tricky is that you have to carefully paint them, whether the metal parts, from the rubber parts, from the track, from the rims to the rubber tires, all of that becomes very tricky to do. But on their T110 series, they went ahead and did it in a different way, where the only parts that are integrally printed is the sprocket and the track itself. However, the road wheels and the rollers are separate printed items. Why this is relevant is because it makes painting much, much, much easier, even if you're keeping the stock track, which, spoiler alert, I'm not on this one, but if you are, you can actually just keep the stock track and work around it, and you should be okay. For this one here, just like with the other T110, I didn't use the track, and there's a reason for that. First, you can see this one here is completely trashed and busted, but let's just pretend that's not the case, and let's just take it out of the bag. Okay, so normally the tracks look like this, and I gotta say on this kit here, the tracks are improved pattern compared to the one on the last T110. If we look at the track face, you'll see that it has the resemblance of a steel chevron track that we see on the Sherman. And what's interesting to point out is that generally on the Patton, the tracks were actually rubber, or I should say the chevron portions were made out of rubber. That's the quite typical iconic tracks seen on the M60 and the M48 family. But they did have a chevron, a steel version as well. They're very rare. Not many were produced or were actually issued out, but there are photographs out there on the internet of Pattons, M48 specifically, with tracks that look just like this. So they did exist, and it's actually really interesting to point out. The way these ones are rendered out are much better compared to the other T110, where the link actually has the appropriate detailing for a steel pattern of chevron link. As you can see, it has the end connectors, it has the center guide tube, it has the split line, and the two chain sections, or I guess I just call them mud slit sections, that would be found on the actual link. However, if you're wondering, well, that's great, John, why aren't you using this track? Well, one, I like the other track, the rubber chevron one, but also what does it for me is the teeth. So if you look at the teeth on this one, specifically the ones that are embusted, you'll see that the tooth is integrally printed on the center portion of the trackpad. In actuality, the tooth should be bridging the gap between the two links. That's how the links are connected together. Because of that, I'm not going to utilize this track, and also this one being severely trashed. The sprocket is actually pretty good. In fact, again, it's a leg up from the other T110 that I built before. What's cool about this, and the irony, is that it's the one time I'm not utilizing the kit supplied sprocket, but it's the one that gives you the mud slits, which is hilarious. This kit gives you the mud slits on the sprocket, which is something that negates most other manufacturers that build these Patton or release these Patton tanks. And it's kind of hilarious. But because I'm not using the track, I'm not going to mess with the sprocket. Trying to clean this out is probably more work than it is to just simply replace it outright. In case anyone's wondering what I'm going to be utilizing instead of the stock track, I'm going to be replacing it with a set of workable track links from none other than AFV Club. I've used the same tracks on the other T110. It came out flawless, and so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. To do that, the sprocket is also going to be 1086, and I do have cast resin replacement sprockets without mud slits on them, but I have to add those anyway, and those are going to be utilized in place of this one here. Maybe I could try cleaning it up. Nah, I'll just rinse, wash, repeat what I did on the other one. But needless to say, if you want to keep these tracks, you can actually do so, and the build will come out for most part pretty good. But again, for the reasons that I mentioned, I'm going to roll with the AFV Club ones. So since I'm not using those, I might as well show the wheels. So here we have the return rollers right here. As you can see, they are integrally printed as a pair, unlike the other builds out there where these are separate halves, you gotta glue them together. That's not the case on these guys. They are a single piece, and they just drop onto the location on the hull. The road wheels are decent. There are better road wheels out there on the plastic kits, I will say that. But for the or I should say with the purpose of this kit here, more than suffice. The back section is pretty absent with detailing, just this dish setup that we have here. So that is admittedly a soft part on the kit, but again, I was able to utilize these wheels with no issue on the other build, and the other build came out, for all intents and purposes, pretty much perfect. So, again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, unless you're talking about the trucks, these are broke, so I'm going to fix that. Anyway, enough to be said about that. Let's go ahead and get this to the shop. But before I do, I could have got replacement tracks, of course, from the vendor. Like I said before, I just sent him an email with pictures, and he would gladly have replaced these, but there's no point since I'm not going to be utilizing them anyway. So with that quick disclaimer out of the way, let's teleport to the shop where I could sink my teeth into this one. And after a few turns on the lathe, you get to see what the unit looks like fully revised. On the rear portion over here, you get to see what it looks like with the wire in place. Like I mentioned before, the lathe does a fantastic job with centering everything, making sure that hole is dead center, and the wire has been glued in place. This is a 16 of an inch piece of floor wire. I am going to snip it after this filming here because it doesn't need to be this long to stick into the turret. However, it does make handling the unit much more easily done, and I feel like a maestro right now with it. On the muzzle end, you can see that I went ahead and drilled it out also. This is the type of procedure where if you don't have the lathe, do not attempt. You can easily just screw the thing up, and that's something that you really don't want to do. But if you have access to a lathe like that, rock on. The hole goes all the way into this section over here. I think it stops around here. You don't have to have the whole thing drilled out, just enough to show depth. And once the unit is painted and weathered, it's definitely going to come out very nicely. On the turret over here, as you can see, it's going through its revisions with the added cast sectioning. I'll touch upon that momentarily. But you can see I went ahead and drilled out the middle section here of the mantlet. And then this piece here is just going to slide directly in place. And as you can see with the metal insert, it's much stronger compared to the way it was before. From here, I'm going to go ahead and snip off the wire and then glue this guy on permanently. Jumping ahead a little bit, here we have the model now fully assembled. At this point here, this thing is ready to head off into paint. And before I do that, I just want to showcase some features that I built into this model at this time because, well, it's more noticeable now as opposed to when it's fully painted. The first thing I'm going to start with is actually the turret. So, in addition to the main armament being fitted, I did another internal modification to the turret itself. As we recall from earlier in the video, this turret does not have any sort of locking system in order to keep it fitted to the hull, and this is quite commonly seen on the other models in the SS model kit range. They're basically just held on with friction, and the friction, I should say the tolerances for this to work are a bit loose, so if you pop it on to the hull, it is going to not be held on in a very secure manner. And this is something I always like to address on my builds. So for this one over here, I did a modification that I've done on a few other of my builds, specifically ones from the SS kit range, which involves the use of magnets for some extra help for retention. If I take the turret off, you will see the setup that we have in place. So the magnets are a permanent magnet here. I picked these up off of Amazon. The link is in the video description below in case anyone wants to do a similar trick to their builds. And for this one, I need to have it on a column that emerging from the lower hull. The column itself is just made out of a scrap piece of resin component from a 1/6 scale model that I had floating around my scrap bin, and I went ahead, put it on the lathe, turned it down, and this was the perfect type of platform to secure the magnet in place. As for the turret, I took another scrap piece of resin over here, and I glued it as a bridge across, drilled a hole in the center, and the other permanent magnet is fitted in place. At that point there, the magnet just locks everything in place, and if I hold the model upside down, hopefully you can see the unit being able to be held in a pretty secure way. The advantage about the magnets, of course, is that it is holding the turret in place, but it allows me to freely rotate the turret to any way I desire, and it doesn't cause any sort of issues with anything snagging up or other issues along those lines. Continuing on with the turret, you get to see the added cast texturing that was added in place. This is something that I also did to the hull that I'll go over momentarily. As for the cast texturing, I utilized two techniques. I utilized my red putty technique with the steppling, which is something that I've seen, or I should say that I've mentioned and showcased on a number of my videos, but large and small. And I also went ahead and utilized the Tamiya, the texture paint that they have for pavement, and this gets brushed on in certain locations. The reason why I used the two material method is because for this area over here, it's very precise with the type of details and fittings that are found on the surface, and going in here with the red putty was just it wasn't really beneficial and it could potentially cause problems. So for this, I went with the paintbrush method because I have more precision. Once everything is painted, though, it should blend in very well, and it'll yield for some excellent results. Some other modifications you can see at this time involve the little grab handles. The original printed in ones were just blade type format, and I just simply remove them and replace them with metal ones, much along the lines as I do on other plastic model kits that I've built on this channel in the past. And on that note, you can also see the lift hooks right here, here, and here. This is something that I just, again, drilled into the section here with a pin vise, fabricated the hooks out of thin floor wire, and added them in place. Same floor wire was also used on the handles for the same effects. All of the kit supply details were utilized. Unfortunately, on the hinges over here, I believe I may have been missing one of the hinges. For some reason, I found one, but the other one was probably lost in the sea of little broken bits from the printing structures. But regardless, rather than trying to worry about that, I just simply just fabricated a new one. It was easily enough done. I took some scrap plastic sprue out of the recycle bin, turned it down, and then with the lathe, I added the cuts for the hinges, and then I drilled a small little hole on each side, and I added a little piece of metal wire, thus completing the look. Once everything's painted and weathered, it should just blend right in with the remainder of the detailing. Also on the rear section over here, you can see I made some modifications to the antenna wells. This one here is the original antenna that was mounted in the kit supplied location, but the antenna base itself was a bit weak, so I replaced it all together. I drilled it out, and I'm going to be adding a cast resin MP65 antenna base that I've utilized in several other vehicles from the same era, and it's definitely going to look the part and look much better compared to the stock original one. Of course, you'll see what this looks like later on as the video goes on. Another bit of detailing that was fabricated was the top dome section here of the air filter. The original air filter that was supplied on this model is just a unceremonious cylinder that's printed in the back section. It's okay for what it is, but I felt that it could be improved. So for this one here, I basically mimicked the design found on the M48 and the M60. For this vehicle here, it's probably a good guess that's what it would have looked like. So I turned it on the lathe. I just had some resin stock, turned it down, drilled the small little holes for the fasteners, and then mounted it in place. The piece itself was actually milled, or I should say was turned to have a little shelf on the inside, so it just plugged directly onto the original kit one without any sort of problems. On the searchlight over here, this is the kit original one, and one thing that miraculously survived, I gotta count my lucky stars on this one, is the power cord. And as I mentioned before, this power cord is very frail and is generally something that can just break just by looking at it. So this thing survived not just the printing, shipping to my shop, and even the construction without it breaking even once. So I gotta say, I got very lucky on this one. If the wire did break, no harm, no foul, just replace it with a small piece of floor wire or something similar to that, but not necessary here. I actually was able to salvage the kit one, and I feel really good about that. One thing I did have to modify, though, was the mounting bracket. There is no mounting bracket whatsoever, and this thing just basically like hangs off of the side of the turret. This is something that definitely could use an adjustment, and so I went ahead and bent a new one right here out of thin metal, glued it in place, and now it's much more structurally sound, and more likely on the real one, it'll probably have something similar to this. Again, part of the charm of Paper Panzers is you do have lots of creative licensing at your disposal, so something like this, you know, you could just basically take authenticity and throw it to the winds, because again, we're rolling with a Paper Panzer here. But chances are really likely, if this thing ever saw the light of day, it probably would have had a bracket very similar to this. These side handles here are the original ones, and were simply just mounted in place without any sort of problems. The only thing that's not yet secured to the turret at this time is the armament over here for the 50, and also the jerry cans. Jerry cans are right here, cleaned up just fine, and they're going to be mounted on after the model's painted, because generally I always like to paint the jerry cans off the model where I could paint them, weather them independently, and then secure them on in place, thus completing the look. From the turret, this brings us to the hull itself. The hull, as you can see, was also covered in the cast texturing, like I mentioned on many other vehicles of a similar nature. And also at this time here, you can see the addition of the ECA HD 3D printed torsion bar detail cover caps. With these fit in place, they look much more improved compared to the stock condition, where it was just an empty flat plate. At this time, you can also see the bump stops that have been added. These are cast resin from I believe a Dragon model that I had a spare unit of. Made a mold of it just so I could cast little springs for these patterns of vehicles. Again, once all painted and weathered, it should really be a big improvement over the stock original. On this side over here, you can see some of the repair work that was done to the shock absorbers. They had an error with their printing, and I was able to clean them up and replace the original printed section with a plastic rod of the exact same size. So again, once everything's painted and weathered, it'll blend in absolutely seamlessly. Generally, this is something I hazard against because you need to have continuity, and generally when you replace something, you tend to need to do it to all of them. However, with these ones over here, I'm pretty confident that once it's all painted, it should blend in without any difference being noticed. Also, on things that are different, we have here the sprockets. The original sprockets were not utilized for the reasons I mentioned before, and here you can see the cast resin replacements. These ones here, just like the other T110 that I built, are made from cast resin copies of Tamiya pattern of M47, or I should say M48, with a little slip there, Tamiya M48 pattern of sprockets. They are a single casting, and do the job just fine. I drilled out the center portion, put in the steel rod, drilled out the section here where it was originally printed for the stock one to go, and the new one just drops directly into place. No fuss, no muss. Also, you can see that the mud slits have been added. Again, this is something that's very commonly seen on pattern vehicles, and it always looks great by giving the model just a little bit of extra detailing. On the rear portion over here, you get to see the details. These are all stock with the exception of these two cover plates here. These were spare from the Academy M68-2 Starship that I did a little while ago. I had them on hand. No point leaving them to loiter around in the spare bin. And I just simply dropped them in place. One thing about the stock SS model kit is that the plates are there, but they're not rendered with their fasteners. The Academy one here has the fasteners present, so it was a great addition to add, and once painted and weathered, it'll look really, really good. On a similar note, I actually also added the cat's eye lenses on the taillights. They are molded flat, or I should say printed flat. I'm still getting used to this whole 3D printed thing, guys, but the original ones were printed flat without any sort of cat's eye detailing present, and so casted the unit that I have on hand out of resin, modified it so the face just drops directly onto the kit one, and then once painted and weathered, it will also really improve the build. Top portion over here, you get to see the tools already added in place. This is generally not something that I do on my builds. I like to paint the tools off of the model, but for the circumstances on this build here, it was best to do it the other way because the pieces, I need to hand fit them slightly in order to get them in place, and this is much easier done at this point here as opposed to when it's fully painted and weathered. So for this one here, I'm just going to have to carefully paint around the tools and their tool posts in order to get everything painted and weathered appropriately. It is something that adds a little bit of extra more difficulty to the build. However, I've done this enough times where I'm confident I should be able to do the job just fine, and we'll see what that looks like as the video progresses. On this side here, you can see the tow cable was added. The endpoints were integrally printed on. The cable itself is just some spare nylon string that I had left over from some other build, probably a Tamiya in the past. And rather than just having this string just loiter around the spare bin, it was a perfect use on this model over here, as it was on the other models in the SS lineup that I've built already in the past. The string was added in place, and then the entire string was soaked in very thin liquid CA, namely this stuff right over here. Stuff's found on Amazon, link in the description. And the beauty about that is, one thing about string is that when you're building a model that has a tow cable and you're using a string tow cable, you have to seal it. Otherwise, you run the risk of the paint getting on the surface, and then it has this like fraying effect, and it's something that never really looks good. But by adding the glue to the surface over here, it turns it into essentially plastic, and then it keeps its shape and it holds its shape much better, so when you get the layers of paint and weathering, it will also look much better in its final end result. The only catch is that, again, you're going to have to carefully paint and weather around everything, just like the tools, which again adds a little bit more difficulty to the build, but if you have your painting techniques all squared away, this is something that could easily be addressed. On the front section over here, it's totally stock. The only addition that I did make was the addition of a M48 pattern of fire extinguisher, because chances are it would have got one for a reason that should be fairly obvious. The unit's a copy of the Tamiya unit, and it just was casted, dropped in place. Once it's painted, it's going to look great, specifically when painted in red, because that's how these things basically looked back during this era. You can see the wheels right over here. They have been removed off of the sprue. Few of the wheels, if we can recall, were broken, and I was able to track down the right and left hand sections that were busted for the appropriate wheels, and I was able to re-glue them back together without any sort of problems. And that's really all there is to mention on this build over here. So from this point onward, the model is actually going to go off into paint. But before I can go ahead and paint it, of course, I need to go ahead and get the surfaces thoroughly primed. For my primer coat, I'm going to roll with El Cheapo Flat Black Spray Paint, as I always mention in these videos. As for the other painting techniques, I'll go over that when I hit that point of the video, which of course is going to come in the next scenes. But before I do that, I am going to go ahead and mask up the inner recesses over here, just because I don't like paint getting onto these bearing surfaces. It makes the turret stick a little, and it doesn't. And it's something that always gets in the way when you just want to rotate the turret. Sometimes it sticks, and it just makes for a less appealing build if you have the turret in that type of format. So go ahead, mask everything up, get this thing into prime, and then let's come back when this model here is fully completed. Jumping ahead a little bit takes us to the model going through its paint and weathering work. As you can see, it's pretty much almost completed, and I'm just wrapping up the last of the paint work on several of the smaller items. And this takes us to the road wheels. One thing that I mentioned on the other T110 video that I did, that was posted a little bit before this one, was that the road wheels on these kits here, they are, as we saw, printed as an integral piece, but there isn't really any clear definition rim on the part itself. If I get the wheel up close, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So you can have to paint the road wheels as you would on any other patent-based vehicle, and it's still doable with a thin paintbrush. However, one hack that I did to speed up the process and to make the road wheels as uniform as possible is I actually paint them on the lathe. These ones here have all been completed. And as you can see, once it zooms in, of course, you can see how the rim is painted, and we have the tire clear and highly defined, as well as also on the interior portions of the wheel as well. Yes, I do paint the interior portions of my rubber tires. And also on the face piece. Same is also done to the return rollers, or I should say the return roller wheels that we have here. Same is also applied to the inner portions as well, because again, you never know when you might not, or you will see these things. When you hold a model up at a certain angle, yeah, you will actually be able to see that stuff. So it's a good idea to go ahead and paint them on any model, let alone on this one. So on this one over here, this is the last wheel that needs to be painted. And I'm going to show the lathe paint work in a second. It's kind of like a life hack. You can probably do it on other tanks as well. I don't really do it as often because it's, shall we say it's a bit more work as opposed to just hand painting it. The only reason why I advocate doing it on these ones over here is because of the lack there of a rim that's found on this section over here. Usually when there's a rim like on a Tamiya or on an Academy, that kind of acts as a jig and also as a barrier, and it prevents the paint from bleeding onto the rim. So that is something that is beneficial. On this one here, that's not the case, so you are going to have to carefully paint that. Can you do it? Absolutely, but it's a little bit easier on the lathe, even though it does require a little bit more extra steps. First is you have to do it in layers. So as you can see, I went ahead and painted the rear portion of the wheel first, and I clamp the piece in the jaws, and then the piece spins, and I go ahead and I paint the inner wheel right here on each side, the face of the tire, as well as the rim itself. I take the unit carefully off with a plier, grabbing onto this section over here, not to disturb the paintwork. Set it aside, let it dry. Once it's fully set, I go ahead, flip it, and paint the other rims. This is the type of thing that you're going to do in like an assembly line format. So you paint one, take it off, set it aside, let it dry, then move accordingly until you finish all the wheels, and then you repeat the process painting the opposite side. It's very similar actually when you're doing it by hand, but on this one here, we're going through the paint application with a machine. So now that you know the theory behind it, I'm going to go ahead, strap this guy into the lathe, and I'll actually show the paint application in real time, I should say. Here I got the wheel. I'm going to go ahead and put into the jaws of the chuck. On the last portion over here, I'm going to try to grip it in the center portion of the tire as much as possible. There is some leeway, but the idea is that you want to have it absolutely centered. If the thing is mounted cockeyed and you have a wobble to it, obviously it's not going to be ideal for the paint work. So the lineup is actually the most important part. Fortunately, it's one of those things that you could either get right on the first try just by eyeballing it, or after like an attempt or two, it basically works itself out and you get the muscle memory. You don't want to over tighten the jaws. We're not removing material. We're just holding it in place to apply the paint. So the piece is in place. As you can see, I totally nailed it on the first try. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and apply the paint. For the paintwork, I got my Tamiya flat black right here. You could use Tamiya rubber black also. I don't have any on stock at the moment, so the flat black is more than suffice for the job at hand. Okay, so I loaded the paintbrush. And here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the rim. And to do that, you want to actually rest your hand on the rail over here for the tail, or for the headstock, so that it keeps it nice and steady. Basically, if you've ever seen those woodworking lathe channels or those videos that pop up on Facebook or on Instagram, whatever social media that you guys use, you'll see that they utilize the tool in the exact same manner because it prevents the piece from jittering. If the piece is jittering or the tool's jittering, you're going to have jittering results, which is less than ideal. So hopefully this comes out on camera and it's not just going to be a knuckle fest. You want to make sure that the rim, that the paint is thoroughly applied. A lot of times, depending on the consistency of the paint, you might get a area which is thicker than others, and that's something that's less than ideal. So you just want to make sure that everything is thoroughly painted. And that's easily done. After a look or two, you can pretty much tell. If anything could pause, like I just did here, turn the piece by hand, and as you can see, it's thoroughly painted. So now that the rim is done, I want to also paint the face of the tire. If this was the piece from last night, or I should say before, I would go ahead and actually also paint the inner rims with much in the same manner as I did with the outer one, but that's already been accomplished. There's no point getting that on camera. All right, so now I'm just going to go ahead and paint the face. This is easy and probably the funnest part. It's also the most satisfying. So there you can see the wheel has now been painted. And I'm going to go ahead and remove it from the chuck over here, or I should say the headstock. Yeah, and I believe that's the tail stock. This is the tool post, and that's the headstock. Yeah, I'm a little bit rusty with my lathe terminology, so don't go ahead and crucify me on that from that mistake I made earlier. But anyway, so to do this, I'm going to go ahead and grab the portion of the tire that's dry. And with the chuck here, or the key, I go ahead and loosen the jaws. And there we have it. The wheel is now thoroughly painted. At this point here, it's ready to be set aside so that it can dry. Well, at least once I get it in focus. There you have it. So from here, I could go ahead, set aside, let it dry, and continue with the remainder of the paintwork. And now you see exactly how to use a lathe to paint your road wheels if the need be ever arises. And this technique does come in handy every so often. It's not something you need to do on every build, but occasionally there might be a build where this technique is probably the best way to go. Obviously, you're going to need a lathe. These aren't something that everybody has. But, you know, if you pick up one from Harbor Freight or something, they're not that expensive. And, hey, you know, you could do a lot of cool stuff with them. But regardless, if you have a certain set of road wheels that need a certain paintwork and you have the accessibility of a lathe, there you have it. And with the model completed, you get to see what all of the suspension components now fully painted look like in their final form. Here we can see not only the addition of the road wheels, but also with the workable track that we'll circle back to in a moment. Starting with the road wheels, here you get to see, because of the lathe technique that I showed before, how all of the road wheels are equally painted and the tire lines are nice and crisp on every single one of them. This alone really amplifies the build and really does make it that much more polished. In addition to the road wheels, hopefully we get in focus here, but you could also see the addition of the torsion cover caps right there in between the road wheels. And with these pieces in place, again, you really get to see just how much more polished it looks compared to the way we had it before with the kit original format. Same is also true for the addition of the idler cover caps, but can't really see it right now in this angle. But again, it's one of those things where it's better to have as opposed to just leaving it omitted. Also, the technique, as we saw before, wasn't just done to the road wheels, but was also done to the return rollers, again, for the same effect. The last thing I do want to mention, of course, about the suspension is the sprockets. As we saw before, the original sprockets were replaced with the Tamiya copy cast resin ones, and with the model fully completed, again, everything, including the mudslide details I was referencing before, just really come out and flesh out very nicely. The addition of the sprockets really do put a nice little cherry on top of the sundae. Of course, this brings us to the tracks, and as I mentioned before, the stock single 3D printed tracks were not utilized on this build. Instead, they were replaced with a set of workable track links from AFV Club. The AFV Club Patton and M60 pattern tracks are an excellent addition to add to this model over here, and as you can see, they really fill it out and flesh it out extremely nicely. The pieces pair very well, with the caveat that the only thing you need to do is swap out the sprocket, and if you do that like I did over here, the tracks are definitely something to consider if you're working on one of these models. As I mentioned on the other T110 Yagged Patton build, the aftermarket tracks from AFV Club are a fantastic option to add to one of these models, or basically any M60 pattern of kit that's on the market. The tracks have been on the market now for about 35 plus years, but they are still in production for a reason. They assemble very, very easily, very quickly, they're really affordable, and are also still easily found. The things have been, again, in constant production since the 90s, and I don't see any problems with these things staying in production for the near future. Again, these things tick all the checkboxes required in order to be a really great set. And paired again with this model over here, as you can see, they take to it like a duck to water. When you're working on one of these tracks, I recommend checking out a track link review tutorial video that I did specifically for these tracks that can be found on the ECA channel, and I also have the link listed in the video description below. But for the tracks themselves, for paint work, you can see how I went ahead and painted and weathered them for this example over here. And if anyone's ever seen several of the other Patton series of vehicles on the channel, you're going to see some very similar paintwork for the same reasons. A lot of people out there, when they're painting these tracks, they tend to misunderstand how to paint them, and they actually go ahead and improperly do it, or they just are unaware of exactly the nuances here that we see on these tracks. On these pattern, or I should say on the Patton type tracks, they are a mixture of rubber and steel, and a lot of people out there, they're not really sure about that, and when they're weathering it, they either add a bunch of rust to the whole thing, or they just paint everything with the same color, and that's not really helping your build too much. On the build over here, you can see exactly one way to go ahead and flesh it out so that you're building the track to its full potential. First, when it comes to the paintwork, because these are workable track links that are made out of plastic and not single-piece vinyl, this opens up the type of paints that you can utilize on the surface. Generally, when you are working on a model and has single-piece vinyls, I always stress, do not use spray paints or enamels to paint the tracks. It's usually a bad idea and never really works out all that well and can cause further issues. However, because these are plastic and are workable, obviously that changes the paradigm, and this opens up to the different types of paints now you can apply to the surface. I would still avoid some of the premium paints like Rust-Oleum or even Krylon, because a lot of times those premium paints are still pretty harsh even on plastic. So that is something to be a concern of. For the tracks here, I just use the standard cheap El Cheapo Rattle Can flat black spray paint to apply the base, and then from there I went ahead and proceeded with the weathering. On the weathering, again, you want to make sure you know what's rubber and what's metal. On these pieces here, the front face are overmolded rubber, while the center guide horn as well as the two end connectors would be steel. And on this example over here, I went ahead and painted it slightly differently compared to some of the other patterns that I've built on this channel in the past. On some of those other builds, I went ahead and painted the mentioned metal materials as a rusty color, which is something that is not wrong. That is, you can see plenty of examples of M60s or M48s with that type of condition that the tracks are in. However, I wanted to make it look like that this vehicle was still relatively fresh in service, and because of that, you really wouldn't have that type of rust built up on a vehicle like in that condition. So I actually was really heavily influenced by this picture here of an M48 in Vietnam, where you could see how the metal sections were wearing on a vehicle that was in constant use. And so I basically mirrored that for this example here. On this one, I went ahead and first painted the metal bits that I mentioned before, namely, again, the center guide tooth, as well as the end connectors with NATO black. And NATO black is a good color because it gives a clear delineation between the color used for the rubber, which is just standard flat black, and the other colors here, which would give it a more Parkerized look. From there, now that I have the two types of colors painted and are visible, I then went ahead and added the weathering. For the weathering, I used some silver paint that was dry brushed onto these surfaces over here to get that type of worn effect. The dry brushing was done to the end connectors, but you could also see them done to the center guide horns. And on a patent family of tank, it's not uncommon for these things to polish down between rubbing through the middle sections of the row wheels extremely quickly. So if you see these vehicles that are, again, still relatively new in service and have been driven, the center guide horns are going to be quite polished like the way you see them here on this example. For the rubber sections, I went ahead, and this is also true for the ones on the interior, by the way, because on the interior portion of the track, the portion that we have in the center would be rubber, and a lot of times, even the way the rubber mold is, it extends to the skeletal structure over here. It's just like a thin coating of rubber on those surfaces that most times chips away, but it's still generally rubber nonetheless. I went ahead and airbrushed some flat white onto these surfaces over here, wiped it down to reveal the type of look that you see here. So you still have the white into the crevices, and you still have just the black portions coming through on the high wear areas, giving you for the realistic look that you see here. As I mentioned before, you have a couple options of painting these tracks. On some other builds in the past, I went with the rusty material, which again is perfectly accurate. It just or I should say, it just depends on what type of look you're going for with your build. And also, it helps to have several vehicles in your collection with the different versions of paint and weathering work, because it just prevents any potential issue of your collection looking myopic, and it just helps to put a little bit of extra life and a little extra uniqueness to the collection if you go ahead and shift things up a little bit from time to time. From the running gear, brings us to the lower hull, and hopefully you could see the cast texturing now popping out in its final form. Obviously, the cast texturing was done to all the surfaces, and it really does amplify the model again, and this is something that I always reference on these patent type vehicles, be it either from this 3D printed example over here, but I also do the same techniques on the Tamiya, the Academy, and basically just about even the Monogram example received the exact same cast texturing that we see on this example here. The only time the cast texturing is not necessarily needed in, or I should say on the entire lower hull, or on some of the more modern kits like the Dragon variants of the M48 and M60. And I wouldn't be surprised if the AFV Club examples, the same is also true, because generally they do have cast texturing integrally molded into these sections, but I do tend to add it on locations where, again, those hulls are multi-piece assembly, and you will need to flare in these certain sections with the texturing, just so that everything, again, looks uniform with the overall look. From the texturing brings us to the nose of the vehicle, and here you get to see what, again, everything looks like in its final form. Like I mentioned before, everything goes on very, very easily and pretty much effortlessly. With the way the kit is designed, it's really nicely engineered that all these pieces lock into the appropriate areas extremely well without really any sort of finagling or too much hand fitting, or any hand fitting for that matter, aside of just removal from the trees, and also just making sure that you properly deburr any sort of remnants left over from the printing sprues. But outside of that, the pieces drop directly into place. And when you're talking about the front portion over here, the only thing you want to pay attention to is properly painting everything. So starting with the headlight clusters, you can see that the headlights do have a certain orientation on how the white lights and how the blackout lights are painted. If you're working on any sort of M48 with this type of a platform, it's a good idea to go ahead and take and find some pictures online of some real examples, so you make sure that you properly paint the components with the appropriate colors. On that note, don't forget to paint the blackout lights, like we have right here, the two little football ones, and also the under portion here of the hooded blackout lights with a little swipe of silver paint. This is something that a lot of people out there tend to forget. They'll paint the main headlights and the blackout light, but they'll forget those other lights, and they do need to be painted. And again, the detailing is there. You just got to go ahead and take a second or two to paint it. On those little sections over there, the camera gets on focus. Hopefully you can see how this was executed. Again, just a little swipe is really all you need. On the hooded ones, the light would be in this little slit that comes right there, and it's right underneath the hood. And again, just a little swipe of silver paint is all you really need to go ahead and bring it out to its full potential. While on the topic of painting things, it brings us to the bow driver periscopes. Again, I always paint my periscopes on my models with a swipe of gloss black. This is a departure from a lot of people out there that use a different type of color on their builds. Some individuals like to paint them silver, others like to paint them blue. Me personally, silver is a horrible color. It's definitely not the way to go. And as for blue, the reason why you see a lot of blue sometimes is that you're seeing the reflection of the sky bouncing off of the prisms found on the lenses. However, if you actually get a chance to crawl around these things and be up close and personal with the periscopes, specifically if the vehicle is buttoned up and is uninhabited, it will be just black in color as it's not having any light on the inside showing through the periscopes. And that's how I like to render these builds. So on my builds, I always go with gloss black. Some people like blue. Me personally, again, from what I've seen in person, gloss black is my go-to for the colors. And on a side note, if you watch any of my real vehicle walk-around videos, pay attention to the periscopes and you'll see a reoccurring theme. Directly next to the periscopes, you can see the fire extinguisher box. I mentioned this earlier in the video on where it came from, but again, now you get to see what it looks like in its final painted format. And as I very frequently do on these builds, the unit was painted with flat red. The red gives it a nice little color pop right over there. It breaks up the monotony of the all olive drab vehicle. And again, this was something that was very commonly done during this period, being again the 50s, 60s, even the 70s. This is seen on not just the M48, but it's also seen on the M60 and even several other US AFV of the period. If it's an M109, a Sheridan, M113, use your imagination. If it's got a fire extinguisher box with external handles, chances are really good during this era they were painted in red. And again, it's a nice little historical little addition to add to the build, and it's one that gives a nice little punch of color. Swinging around to the back takes us to the rear details here, again, now in their final format. As you can see, the taillights were painted, and on the taillights on these American vehicles, you want to make sure you paint them appropriately, where the one on the left-hand side, the cat's eye, is painted in red, while the blackout light on the opposite side is not. A little swipe of gloss black is what I use to replicate the look on these vehicles. And as you can see, without a whole lot of extra work, the build looks that much more polished. Of course, the rectangular white light is still painted with a little swipe of silver. Just make sure your paint game is on point and make sure that the brush that you're using is very fine and that the paint is at the right consistency, and you should have good results. Going a little lower, you get to see those axis panels I mentioned before. With the panel light accent added, you can see just how much extra detailing it gives this portion of the vehicle. It was a simple addition like I mentioned before, but one that definitely yields some excellent results. One other thing I didn't get to mention earlier on in the video was with the rear tin work. So with the way the model was originally manufactured, there was a large plate that we saw that the unit was suspended on with a ton of these little rods that suspended it for the manufacturing process. And as the piece is removed, you will have little tiny nubs that stick out of these sections over here, and the piece kind of looks like a plucked chicken, best way to describe it. It's really easy to polish away, just some hand sanding with some fine sandpaper, possibly a little wet sanding, and the piece will polish away into the way we see it here, where it's nice and smooth. And this is definitely something that will greatly help the build, as opposed to having those little things poking through. Same was also seen on the rear section over here where all this detailing is, but obviously not a whole lot of effort was done to make sure it was thoroughly removed because the cast texturing kind of cakes everything over. But again, you want to just do a once over if you're working on one of these, just to make sure you don't have any of those little pegs that are sticking out of the surface. Continuing brings us to the rear engine deck. This vehicle here, essentially having the engine deck similar to an M48 or an M48A1, has that nice little barbecue deck area, and this is one that looks fantastic as a focal point, specifically when you go ahead and throw on the Tamiya panel line accent. It'll just go into all these sections over here and just amplifies things immensely. But we'll get to that later on as I go over the paint and the weathering. This takes us to the tools. As I mentioned before, the tools were pre-installed on the model, and then I went ahead and painted it and weathered it carefully after the model was fully painted. And, well, the proof is in the pudding. As you can see, the paintwork turned out to be a complete success. Again, this is one of those things where your paint game and your paint consistency game needs to be on point. You need to have a good brush, good paint consistency, and you'll have some decent results. For the actual colors of the tools, you do have lots of creative licensing available as a builder. These vehicles here of this era, you can have tools either overpainted with the same olive drab as the vehicle. You have different shades of olive drab. You could even do what I did here, where you have the wood handles and the metal components left in their natural color. Or you could even do a mixture of all of those. Really, there's a lot of possibilities available, and that's really best up to the builder's discretion. Me personally, for this build here, I went with the following format because it just adds a bit of extra color in having it in this format. However, again, your results may vary. In addition to the tools themselves, I also went ahead and painted the tool posts and the straps. For the posts, these are, of course, the same color of the vehicle, so when you're painting the piece, you just got paint around it and you should be all right. And as for the straps themselves, on these vehicles, the straps were a olive green webbing material. And to paint them on this example over here, I used Tamiya olive green. It's a perfect color out of the bottle. It's a nice little shade. Definitely looks the job quite nicely. And all you gotta do is just carefully just paint the little sections, as I've done on this example. When you're working on one of these type of vehicles, you want to make sure you know what part is webbing strap and what part is actually tool post that's connected to the vehicle. It's not hard to figure out, but if you carefully navigate the waters, again, it's definitely worth the juice. On the reverse side, you get to see the same type of details with the fittings painted. And this takes us to the tow cable. I mentioned the tow cable earlier in the video where it was a piece of nylon string, and as I mentioned before, you need to impregnate the string with some thin super glue because this will help with paintwork. And as you can see, the cable came out absolutely perfect. Like I was referencing before, if you do not have any sort of impregnation on the surface with glue, the cable, a lot of times when you paint it, will fuzz up and it'll just really hurt, if not destroy, the look of the build. So once the unit is absorbed with that thin super glue, it now becomes plastic, and you can see that it's impervious to any sort of fraying. And when I just go in here and paint the thing with the appropriate colors and weather it accordingly with the dry brush, it definitely looks the part quite nicely. The eyes are painted with a different shade of olive drab compared to the vehicle. Again, gives some extra color pop. And as for the cable itself, I went over it with a couple layers of the Tamiya panel line accent. It just flowed in there. And once it was darkened up, I went ahead and took some dry brushing with some silver paint and just carefully went over the surface here, giving you for the final result. The key with the cable, or with the string type cables, is that with the CA that you have to use is the thin, runny stuff. The thinnest stuff you can find is the stuff to use on cables. You just apply it with a piece of wire, a little drop goes in there with the Ninja poison technique. It secures it to the model, and once it goes into those fibers there, it's so thin that it thoroughly penetrates into the fibers, but most importantly, it does not clunk up and remove any of the weave that you want for the cable. For the glue that I used, the material can again be found in the link in the video description. Moving topside takes us to the turret, and you can see again how much refined the model looks with the cast texturing added in place. It really does a fantastic job with making everything look complete. The handles all went on, again, as per the kit, no problems there, as did the jerry cans. The jerry cans themselves are decent, and I just went ahead and just thoroughly painted them. The jerry cans are very similar to ones we see on several other plastic models out there, where we have the can, the strap, and the mount integrally. Most of the time it's molded in, but this one, of course, is printed on. And you just have to carefully go through the paintwork. For the can itself, I based it off of the real jerry can that I have in my collection. That is a old Cold War era fuel can that's specifically for gasoline, and that's identified with the red top portion that you can see here. The middle portion is painted with Tamiya olive drab, has a nice, really great color to it. It's perfect for jerry cans and ammo cans. And for the red, just a little swipe of Tamiya flat red was all that was utilized. The tray itself, same color as the remainder of the vehicle, so it blends in. And for good measure, the strap here was painted with the Tamiya olive green, as I mentioned before, and the buckle was painted with a little swipe of Tamiya flat black. As again, this is something that would be seen on the real straps. Same was also done to the unit on the opposite side. I went with the gasoline jerry cans because this vehicle more than likely would have been powered by a gasoline engine, so painting it in this format is definitely something that would make sense. On this portion of the vehicle, you get to see the air blower that I fabricated earlier and how much improved that thing looks. And on the searchlight, you get to see the power cable that was miraculously one that survived manufacture and the build of the vehicle. And I just went ahead and painted it with a little swipe of Tamiya rubber black, giving you the power cord detailing that you see here. Seriously, the plants lined up very well on that one, and count my lucky stars, nothing broke or added any extra complications. For the searchlight, you'll notice I did not go ahead and paint this silver. These searchlights do have a shutter, or it looks to have a shutter on them, similar to the ones we see on the JGSDF Type 74, and some other, I believe the Leopard have things similar as well. So I just rendered it with the searchlight in the closed type format. But again, your results may vary if you want to make it with the shutters in the open position. Obviously, you're definitely free to do so. On the rear bustle area, you'll notice that there's nothing present. Again, this is just as per the kit. If I was to do another one, I would more than likely go ahead and fabricate a rack, a gypsy rack, much along the lines we see on the M60A1. I think it would actually pair very well with this vehicle over here, but for this one here, I just, again, left it in the stock format. But hey, it's something to consider out there if you are getting one of these kits and you really want to do something unique with it. I think the addition of a scratch build gypsy rack would probably be one that would be really beneficial. Definitely food for thought. On the top portion, we get to see the MP65 antenna bases. These are the old school Tamiya ones from the M41 Walker Bulldog that I've been utilizing on many, many builds. The old kit actually has some pretty solid MP65s. I made a mold of it years ago when I did that build, and I've been utilizing it ever since. The MP65s are painted in the usual format, where the bottom portion is painted to replicate an amber porcelain color, which is Tamiya Hull Red, with a little swipe of Tamiya Gloss for good measure to add that sheen. Then we have the midriff section over here. The black portion would actually be rubber. This would be flexible on the real unit. And then the top portion here would be olive drab. This is where an actual antenna would slip in place. Because the tooling is so tiny, trying to have the antenna is just problematic. But again, the antenna will just slip on and off on the real one. So rendering it in this format here is definitely not something that's an issue. Also, as I mentioned before, there was only one provision for an antenna found on this vehicle, but it's not uncommon, or actually it's pretty much standard for US AV to have more than one antenna base location and provisions on the vehicle. So I went ahead and again added it to this other area over here, which generally would be the case on these vehicles. Moving to the cupola, as I mentioned before, the hinges were fabricated, and now that everything's painted, everything blends in. You can see some of that cast texturing that I added before, along with those little lift rings. Another feature that I added that I'm not sure if I mentioned was I added the cut line right over here, where you can see that the cupola is separate from the turret. Originally, this was just one piece. There was no split line that we can see. This was carved in with the use of a Dremel, and I believe also with an X-Acto. And with that little line added, it just gives a little bit of extra detailing to the build. Also, I went ahead and replaced the stock M2HB, or the stock MG, I should say, with a front end section of an M2HB. This here was a unit that I had on hand. It was floating around the spare bin. In fact, this thing here was something that was seen in a previous video on one of the OTRs. If anyone's a fan of the OTR videos, if you ever saw my Italeri M36 B1 video, on that kit, there is an M2HB that is found as a spare piece that's found on the top deck. And with the way that kit is rendered, it gives you not just a barrel, but also gives you the front end section here with the cooling shroud. Obviously, that wouldn't be a thing. The cooling shroud's connected to the receiver. And so on that build, I didn't utilize this piece, and I did something else. Well, no point having this thing languish away, so I went and took it. I polished it up by deleting the molded in studs that are used to plug it onto the rear of the turret, and from there I basically transformed it into an M2HB. I did drill out the muzzle section of the Browning right over there, as I usually do, for extra detailing, and as you can see, it came out absolutely perfect. Once the piece was painted and weathered, it just dropped directly into this location over here, really without any sort of problems, and it polished extremely well. For the paintwork, I use my usual format, just standard flat black spray paint, then a little bit of dry brushing. Gives you the end results that we see here. And to wrap it up, a little poof here with some flat black on the airbrush. completes the look as you see presently. Obviously, the turret periscopes were painted with gloss black, like I mentioned before with the hull. Same was done to the optic here for the gunner. And on the front hatch, you got to see the addition of that metal handle now in full view. Moving forward brings us to the mantlet. Nothing much to mention over here. The only thing was that the cast texturing was added, and it definitely completes the look quite nicely. On the inner portion here, it's probably easier if I go ahead and temporarily remove the turret. As you can see, the magnet system works extremely well for this. And with the way everything was masked up, like I stated before, you don't really want to get too much paint on the bearing surfaces, because then it will cause the turret to stick. And as you can see, if you leave one of the surfaces or both of the surfaces with the bare material, it tends to pivot much more easily. But back to the mantlet that we have over here. So this unit here is the optic. This one here would be the coax MG. And on the optic, I went ahead and just painted it with a little bit of gloss black on the inside portion over here, while the MG has a little toot of powder fouling from the airbrush. On the topic of powder fouling, takes to the end of the main ordnance, and as you can see, just a little bit of airbrushing was done in the appropriate locations, completing the look. Also, as I referenced before, and I showed earlier in the video, the thing was drilled out, and hopefully this can come out on camera. But yes, there is a hole in this section over here, and it's one that does really improve the look of the build. Unfortunately, it's not really visible with the lighting situation that I have, but as we saw, it is there, and yes, it's one that definitely enhances the build overall. And that's all there is to the detailing, and with the camera zoomed back a bit so I could get the whole thing into frame, this takes us to the paint and the markings. So for the model's paintwork, I utilize the same dark shade of olive drab that's been seen on several other vehicles on this channel. This is the color or the shade of OD that we'll see on vehicles from the late World War II time frame through the 50s, into the 60s, and even a little bit into the 70s. For the color itself, this is my tried and true method of utilizing latex exterior house paint, and it's one that, again, I developed a color swatch, took it to the Home Depot, and I have a gallon of this stuff, ready to go on tap. As I frequently mention, a lot of people out there find this to be a point of contention for one reason or another, but hey, you can't argue with the end results. They look fantastic, and I'm going to continue to utilize it in perpetuity till the end of time. So if that's you and you don't like me using that paint, deal with it. As for the paint itself, you can't just apply it directly to the surface. Even if you're utilizing standard modeling paints from Tamiya or Mission or any of those other brands, you still really can't utilize it without some sort of surface primer. For my primer needs, like I've mentioned many times, I utilize El Cheapo flat black spray paint. Apply it to the surfaces, it does the job just fine, and it's the perfect base to add the subsequent paints on top of it, being exterior latex or just standard modeling acrylics, or enamels for that matter. Doesn't matter, whatever it is, the thing needs to be primed first. After the base coat was added, I then went ahead and added some filters and washes to it to bring it to the hue that we see here. The filters and washes would include a diluted cream color, as well as also a diluted Tamiya olive drab. They were heavily watered down and then applied to the surfaces, giving it for the look that we have here. The surfaces do have the drab poking through, and you also have the sun fade effect and the chalkiness that would generally happen from being exposed to ultraviolet light. After the weathering was applied with those other techniques, I went ahead and did some counter shading. Now, the way I do counter shading is very different compared to a lot of other builders out there. One technique that's all the rave is the one where you prime the vehicle and then you counter shade or add the counter shading at that point, and then you add the subsequent base coats with some thin translucent layers until you build up the final end result. Me, I literally despise and I hate that technique with a passion. I go over that in a few other videos. I'm not going to go into too depth in this one, but rest assured that's a technique that I most certainly absolutely abhorrently hate. So rather than going with that technique, I used a technique that I've been using forever now, where I add, at first the colors are start as opaque, and then I add translucent colors on top of it, bringing to the end result that we see here. For the counter shading, this is done with diluted Tamiya flat black, and I just go ahead and airbrush it over the appropriate locations, giving you for the counter shading results that you see on my build. Kind of tricky to get right now without the camera zoomed in, but as you've seen throughout the entirety of this video, there are lots of counter shading, streaking, as well as also little spot detailing that was done with the same technique. After the counter shading was completed, I then went ahead and gave the model the coating of the Tamiya panel line accent. The black panel line accent goes into all the appropriate areas, doing its job, and it does its job very well. The engine deck definitely just loves that stuff, as I mentioned before, as does the suspension. Goes in there, makes all of the little fasteners and everything just pop out, makes the panel lines here on the tin work pop out. It's just a fantastic product. Definitely something that will make your life very much easier if you go ahead and apply and figure out and apply on your builds. The only catch is that if you're using that stuff, it has to be acrylic paint. You can't be rolling with enamels and go with that stuff. No, don't do that. If you're going with acrylic paints, the Tamiya panel line accent is definitely the way to go, because that stuff is essentially just turpentine thinned out enamel black. And if you have a enamel painted model, it's gonna melt the paint. It's gonna be a problem. Even though I use spray paints for the base coat, which is enamel paint and can be attacked by the panel line accent, by the time the panel line accent gets added, there are several layers of acrylic on the surface, acts a bit of a shield, and it prevents it from eating away at it, specifically in short durations. If I have things submerged in the stuff, after a while, yeah, it's going to start eating away at the paint. But if you're just applying the paint to the surface and you're thinning it out with some mineral spirits and you're getting in there and wiping it down and doing streaks and stuff, you should be fine with the standard with the standard Tamiya panel line accent. After the panel line accent was done, it was then time for the dry brushing, and this was done in my usual format with a fan brush with some flat black enamel, and I just go ahead and apply it and chip all the various locations that are frequently done on these builds. The very last thing to mention about the weathering was the exhaust manifold over here. The exhaust manifold, of course, is like, again, an early M48 or an M48A1. And I went ahead and applied the heated rust type effects here with the use of an airbrush, some with acrylic paint, and then some, to me, a flat black was done right there on the manifold itself and around the manifold itself for good measure. The sweating effects over here on the fuel filler cap was just done with a little bit of Tamiya gloss after the model was coated with the VMS matte varnish. And on that note, this brings us to the markings. So generally on these vehicles, the markings are water slide decals, and they're just from the spare bin if they are supplied with the build, which this one here does not give you any markings. So the markings that we see here are from the spare bin, but they are not water slide decals. These are Archer dry transfers. And just press F into the chat, because Archer dry transfers are awesome. I always did love dry transfers. Unfortunately, he doesn't make them anymore. The business is still around, but they shifted from dry transfers to water slide decals. And I have used his decals in the past. They're all right, but the dry transfers were just so nice. I love dry transfers. Again, rest in peace. But here's what they look like with dry transfers added. They went on without any sort of problems. They're wonderful. I really do miss those things. Seriously, if you get a chance to do another run of dry transfers, Archer, hit me up. Anyway, after the dry transfers were added, I still went ahead and added some varnish coats to the model just to seal it up and just to give it that nice little look that the models have when they are varnished. Because they are dry transfers, you do not have to worry about silvering of any sort. But again, even though the varnish was still applied to just thoroughly seal the surfaces and making sure everything looks as flat as possible, which again, the VMS matte varnish does a fantastic job with doing. The VMS matte varnish is applied with the airbrush. It's applied at the very tail end of the build, and after the varnish work is done, I then go ahead and wrap it up by adding the glossy bits like the lights, the drippy fuel effects on the filler spout, and also the little powder fouling effects for good measure. But that's really all there is to that. In the end, this was a ridiculously awesome and fun build. I enjoyed myself thoroughly from the moment I started to the moment I added the last brushstroke. This model really was one that came together extremely well. I most certainly do not have any sort of regret whatsoever in picking this model up and going through the entire build process. I really did enjoy every moment of it. This thing was a blast to work on, and the subject matter definitely mirrors that as well. Sometimes in life, you just know you're going to be in for a good time just by seeing the previews. be it either a movie, a TV show, or a video game, or even a meal for that matter. Well, that was exactly my experience with this one over here. Second I saw this one was available, I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be a great time. And fortunately, it totally mirrored my expectations. And that is the perfect point to pivot us into skill level and recommendations. So even though I have hearts coming out of me for this build over here, is this something that I can recommend for a beginner? And the answer is absolutely not. Nope, not happening. If you're a beginner and you never touched a plastic model before, then steer clear away from this kit over here. It's most certainly not going to be for you. If you're an intermediate builder, you've done a handful of kits in the past and you're basically comfortable with your skills, you have room for improvement, but you're more than competent enough at putting together a basic plastic model kit, then this too is not going to necessarily be something I can recommend. And I could even extend that to some advanced builders out there. If you're just the type of person that is only used to working in polystyrene, then these resin kits here are going to be outside your comfort zone. Working with a resin kit, be it either the old school cast resin type kits or what we see in the market today being the 3D printed resin type kits, do require a certain skill set that a lot of modelers just aren't used to or accustomed to. And unless you basically have these skill sets ironed out, these 3D printed kits are going to be something that is going to be a bit of a learning curve for you to figure out. This would be things like such as removal of the printing sprues to even gluing parts together. A lot of people out there, they like to use plastic cements for their builds, and if you are working on a resin model, plastic cement is going to do zippity-doo-dah. It's just not going to hold the parts together, and you are going to need to be working with super glue. Now granted, I work with super glues even on my plastic model, so for me it's not an issue, but a lot of people out there, they're used to working with traditional cements, and if that's you, again, that alone is going to be outside of your normal comfort working zone. Something else about these models over here is that they do tend to require a little bit of extra hand polishing, a little bit of extra elbow grease in order to fully make them achieve their full potential. And if we compare and contrast this with some of the modern tooling plastic kits out there, where they are really good to go from the out-of-the-box components, more or less. You could take like a modern kit from Tacom or Mang or whatever, build it with the out-of-the-box components, and the thing is going to be pretty much solid from the base kit. On one of these type of resin or 3D printed kits over here, they do give you a pretty good base. However, it's really up to discretion of the builder to enhance it and carry it further, like I've done with not just this build here, but also with basically every other of the SS kits that I've brought to the table in the past. For instance, as a quick compare and contrast, we have this model here, and I guess a good contemporary would be the M103 kit from Tacom, which is an excellent kit, by the way. I want to pick one up, but either way, if we compare and contrast what both kits give you out of the box, this one here required a little bit more hand upgrades in order to bring it up to a condition that's essentially what the Tacom kit gives you out of the box. For instance, workable track links, the cast texturing, the addition of these detailed components that were mentioned in this video are not necessarily required on the M103 kit. So again, if you're used to working with a kit along those lines, then something like this here is going to be, again, outside of what you're used to, and you may come across or walk away feeling a bit underwhelmed or thinking that the kit's not really that high quality. However, again, these kits are meant to be more or less a fixer-upper, and it's a good start to work with for you to go ahead and make it more your own, and also to enhance it further from what, again, the kit gives you out of the box. And this is basically the nature of these kits over here. Again, be it from the old school cast resin kits from, for instance, Accurate Armor, to, again, the modern equivalents, be it from SS or any of the other up and starting 3D printed resin companies that seem to be popping out of the woodwork these days. When you're going for a model with this type of medium, you're going into it knowing this, and also, generally speaking, the reason why you're going for a model like this is because it's your only option. It doesn't exist in a polystyrene format, to which then it's like, okay, challenge accepted, let's go ahead and roll with it. And that's what this kit does, and what the other kits in the SS model lineup do extremely well. As we saw earlier, there's some aspects on this kit that are very basic that for injection molded plastic kits would honestly be unforgivable, and you would see people ragging on it nonstop on the forums. Case in point on this one here, the torsion bar swing arms. Very, very plain, not really all that much detail on them stock, but Obviously, it leaves room for improvement, and with the sets that I developed, definitely do take care of that, or you can just scratch build your own if the need be arises. Again, this is the type of skill sets I'm referring to when I'm talking about these type of kits over here. However, one attribute that this kit does have is that it is relatively simple. And because of that, if you are looking to get into non-plastic model kits and you're looking to just expand your horizons a little bit, where you want to try something new but not something that's overly complex, then one of these kits over here does become a viable option. Because, as we saw, the model itself is actually relatively simplistic with the details it gives you and with the part count that it has. It's not exactly something that's too overbearing, and because of that, if you just are one that takes your time and just navigates the waters accordingly, you can potentially throw one of these up together and have a good time doing so. Obviously, in this video, I went ahead in great depth describing the modifications and upgrades that were made to the build in order to enhance it further, as well as also many of the techniques that I've added and used on this build over here are ones that I've mentioned in great depth on other videos in the past, be it things like cast texturing or even just with the assembly of the workable track links. So again, if you just go ahead and carefully navigate the waters appropriately, you too can have a decent experience with working with one of these kits. And of course, most certainly, the juice is definitely worth the squeeze. And that's all there is to mention about skill level, which takes us directly into recommendations. So straight out of the gate, if you are a patent guy, this is going to be the kit for you. If you're the type of guy that has several versions of the M48 or M60 in your collection, as well as the patent adjacent vehicles like the M103s or even the T29 family, then yeah, the addition of this kit over here is not just recommended, in my opinion, it's mandatory. These models here will fit in beautifully in that type of collection without any sort of problems. Along similar lines, if you're a fan of Cold War era armor or Cold War era prototype armor, I really don't need to finish that sentence. If you're the type of guy that has, again, the T29 from TACOM or Hobby Boss, the M103s, or even the Dragon T54 prototype tank in your collection, the addition of this one over here is just one that's going to work swimmingly in your collection. Obviously, because of the subject matter, this kit was definitely recommended for anyone who has a collection or an affinity for paper panzers. You know who you are if you have the E100 or any of those really wacky proposed German vehicles like the Waffenträger and things like that, then the T110 series in general is definitely one that I would really recommend for your collection. Along similar lines, if you're the type of person that's into playing those tank games like World of Tanks and similar, then obviously this kit here is definitely going to be one to think about and check out. But again, pump your brakes, that's only if you have the required skill sets that I mentioned before in order to tackle one of these. The reason why I say that is that a lot of these gamer guys out there, they are really good at playing the video games, however, they're not necessarily model builders, and if that's you and you've never touched a plastic or any model kit before, then the addition of one of these here may be problematic. But if you do have the required skill sets that I've touched upon before, and you're into playing this vehicle in the game and have a great time while doing so, then yeah, have at it. You're definitely going to have a pleasant experience, and you're definitely going to have a really cool addition to your collection that will be a conversation piece. And the last person who I would recommend this kit to is anyone who's looking for something different. As I've mentioned on several other builds in the past that are similar to this, if you are the type of person that have built more Tigers and Panthers to fill the Bronx Zoo, or you've built enough Shermans and T-34s to liberate all of Europe, then you tend to want to expand your horizons a bit and tackle something that's different and a bit more flavorful. And if that's you, there's usually two go-tos for that type of an experience. One are interwar vehicles, and the second are paper or prototype vehicles. And if that's you, boom, this model over here is definitely one to keep on your radar. As I mentioned before, I had an absolute blast while working on this one, and what's really cool about the SS lineup is that they have all three of the T110 Heavy Tank prototypes in their kit lineup. I've already built the one, this is the second one, which means there's only one left to go ahead and have a complete collection. And in this racket, that's actually important to say because very rarely do you actually get a chance to complete a collection, as there's usually always one or two that pops up and tends to put a monkey wrench into things. But that's a topic for another video for another day. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for the 1/35 scale T110e5 Heavy Tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being small scale model showcase videos like this one over here, or the larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.